think a trend that we've noticed where Parliament again surrenders, or rather, if this clause 7, section 7, subsection 5, 3, right, was to pass, which allows for the Cabinet Secretary to bear the discretion to apply excise duty on any spirit as they choose. Our thinking at the Institute of Economic Affairs is Parliament would be ceding its obligation provided by Article 211 and 12 of the Constitution by allowing the Cabinet Secretary to decide what to tax and what not to tax. And our view is that discretion is not transparent. It is unlikely that the Cabinet Secretary would invite us to a room like this, as Parliament has, to debate whether that duty should be applied. We think you should keep that discretion because it is constitutionally granted to Parliament. So if you choose, what I think you should be is to set a specific, define what spirits should not be subject to excise taxes, or rather to excise duty for the imports of inputs or for its manufacturing processes, and have that in the law. It provides certainty and avoids discretion that is applied by one interpretation by the commissioner or anybody else. On the bottom of the page, with respect to section 26, here again, the proposal in the Finance Bill rather, is for extending the period for payment of excise taxes on alcoholic beverages from warehouses from 24 hours to 5 working days. I think this comes from last year, where the law was amended, or rather an introduction was made where all manufacturers or traders with goods, alcoholic beverages within warehouses would have to pay the excess tax within 24 hours of their leaving that house. And obviously it proved unworkable. We stated that. We don't think that excise taxes, in as much as they're very, very important, should be treated any differently from VAT or others. So our proposal is for Parliament not to accept this. 5 days doesn't change much. In our view, Parliament could place a date, say the 20th, and decide that all new service. But this provides certainty, and it helps the firms that do this manufacturing and manage this to actually have specific people designated to provide that response, and the records will be available, obviously, for review as necessary. I am under pressure, I know I need to. So we'll go to page 9. Page 9. Okay, now we are speaking specifically of the proposal to raise the excise tax on confectionaries from 1,500 per kilogram to 2,000 per kilogram. And imported confectionery rather. And again, we have to ask here, if this proposal went through, what problem is being settled? It's on page 9, right at the top. And our view is that there is no reason for this series of changes. And I think Parliament
is noting that on these others, you're on confectionaries.
Yes.
You haven't gone to cigarettes, okay?
Yes, I'll be coming to cigarettes. But our view is that there is no reason to make that very drastic change, because we have no evidence in Kenya. We looked at the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey, and there's no suggestion that Kenyans are getting fatter or sicker because they're eating too much chocolate. As a matter of fact, there's not too much confectionery that many Kenyans eat. There are people who eat it. They tend to be urban and high income people. But a 33% change in our view is, yes. So then we come to on cigarettes. And cigarettes, yes. There's liquid nicotine for electronic cigarettes. The proposal is to change it from 70 shillings per milliliter to 100 shillings per milliliter, which is almost, I think, 48% change. Our proposal is, it's on the same page 9, just towards the bottom. Our proposal is Parliament should not accept this. I think you should retain tax rates where they are. Too frequent changes in tax rates also creates uncertainties in the market. You should retain it from where it is and observe. If you see that it does not change behavior, then obviously you could revise it. But our thinking is that, remember that liquid alternatives to nicotine are considered as safer, not absolutely safe, but a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes, yes. So giving people an opportunity and a path to move towards safer products is something I think that is consistent with public health and the health of Kenyan citizens that Parliament should support. So I think you should retain the taxes where they are today. And then we go to page 10. Page 8, is it page 8 or 10? I think a proposal from Section 42 of the Finance Bill to amend for motorcycles from tariff from 11,608, to current excess rate of 11,608 to 12,000, or a 10%, whichever is the value. Our view again is that if you look at the data showing incomes have not grown, motorcycles are useful for urban transport, but also transportation in rural areas. We don't see that there's a real pressure for Parliament at this time to consider raising these taxes. So please retain them as they are. I think the revenues will stabilize, they will grow. There's no reason to hurt job employment and all that at this point in time. We think the same of imported sugar confectionery, which would be rising from 40 shillings to 257. That's a very huge margin. Our thinking is it should all be maintained. Then on cigarettes, from 3,825 to 4,100 per meal, which is 1,000 units. I think you should retain it. Now, cigarettes is particularly, you need to be very careful about cigarettes for two reasons. The data, and part of it accepted, shows that 25% of cigarettes smoked in Kenya are illicit. And part of what drives the incentive for illicit cigarettes in Kenya is because tax rates in Kenya are almost 2.5 times for cigarettes and for alcohol what the neighbors have. So when you drive this back again, you might have the right intention. But the reality of the markets is that people will simply go across the borders because of the absence of our coordination and then bring them back in here. So 1 in 4 cigarettes consumed in Kenya comes from illicit purposes, and because they're much, much cheaper. So it's still useful for, or rather, it's still useful for somebody, or it would still be profitable for somebody to go across the border and then bring them back here. So what it does is actually drives jobs, and it drives investment from this country back to the neighbor. So let's consider about how far the gap between cigarettes, or rather, these products across the border and Kenya is. So our intention is to, our quest here is, yes, I think greater enforcement to ensure that there's no illicit trading should go on, but there's no reason to make the enforcement journey even more difficult by providing a bigger premium for people who would buy and traffic illicit substances. I know I need to finish, so I'll just say 2 more points and then finish here. Yes. On page 10, at the bottom, because we've spoken about the other things, on page 10 at the bottom, we're talking about in Section 42, Part 1 of the Finance Bill proposes to apply taxes, excess tax, of course, on palm oil and a series of vegetable oils. I think you should expunge this tax hike for reasons, again, this is food. If you decompose the monthly measurement of the consumer price index, the prices of oil are actually part of the bigger drivers of inflation in the last year. It seems moderated, but it was part of the biggest one. I'm not too sure that Parliament would be helpful by raising that cost, both for households, of course, at all levels, but in general, I don't know that it's extremely helpful. So Parliament should consider that out. And so as we conclude, I think we have comments on the miscellaneous taxes and levies, but we'll leave that because it's already stated and some of it have been reiterated by those who sat here. I'll just say 2 things to Parliament here. Allow me to say 2 things. One, I think last year's Finance Act was an extremely difficult one for Kenyans to carry. We as Kenyans would like to be assured that you listen to the reasonable petitions that we make before you. We did not get the impression that that happened last year. You were very polite as you are today, and nevertheless, your reports did not reflect in many ways. And I'm not saying that you must take everything that we at the Institute of Economic Affairs say. No, we're just saying that you be careful that these Kenyans do not become cynical of public participation around the finance bill by thinking that this is already done, this is just the tick box ticking. That's one. The second one is coherence on Kenya's taxation policy. We think that VAT and excise taxes have become an enormous, complex, incoherent role of taxes. This is what we think. And I think Parliament is struggling together with the executive and the revenue service about how do we make sure that we have sufficient revenues to support the public services that are critically needed. We are telling you that we see the jump in revenue in the complexity in the VAT from zero exempt to standard rating. And that complexity shifts from one way. So this thing is, we think that, I think you're struggling with something that you can solve by making a bold and serious decision that helps to stabilize markets in Kenya and investment. Because VAT is essential, or you think it is essential, then consider reducing its rate and spreading it over all goods. So if you take a glide path from 16% today, say that in the next 5 years we'd like it to come substantially to 12, and then spread it over all goods. There'll be less distortions, because markets are not as neatly divided as you are. You don't have these problems with, we say you collected 300 billion in VAT, but you owe other people 20 billion back, and all that. So the complexity in Kenya's tax system is worrying, and it's making compliance and everything else very, very complicated. And the third one is the frequent changes in taxes. The frequent changes in all taxes, including excise taxes, have, for instance, revealed that even cigarettes and alcohol, and I don't speak for them at all, I have no interest commercially or otherwise in it, when you raise taxes too high, revenues actually suffer. So there has to be a reasonable compact and a stability in revenue. That tax design question is something only Parliament can solve. And ladies and gentlemen, please take on that challenge and solve it. We'll be watching you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll be cheering you. Thank you.
But come with all fairness, I look some of the submissions that you made last year, including the ones you've made. The finance bill of 2023 actually attempted to change some of this from zero rate to exempt, and we listened to you. And actually, the Finance Act we zero rated them. That is why Treasury is trying now again to ask us again to take them to exempt. And I could say, last time you spoke very passionately about the right to justice. I think it was a 20% or 50% deposit that you're supposed to make before you go to appeal. Didn't we listen? But that's, when you say we didn't listen.
No. Okay, I think when we make submissions here, we make submissions on the basis of seriousness. We know this is a serious house. It is not to be threatening. I think it's Kenyans having a discourse with the people they elected and who represent them. So we'd like you to feel the pain of Kenyans at households, at farm level. So no, we take this very, very seriously, and please do not take it that we are being flippant. No, thank you.
Yes, but I want to call on you on your statement that the proposals you made to this committee, you did not feel the import of them when it was passed, because I've actually given you an example of 2 matters, just 2, offer that you came here, you're very passionate about. You're very passionate about this change of exempt to zero rate. We listened to you. We actually incorporated that into the report, and the House agreed with us. You're very passionate about access to justice and the 20% deposit. You spoke very passionately about it. We agreed with you and made a recommendation to the House, and the House accepted our decision. You talked about and there's an attempt to bring that again here, the payment to public officers for assets, even when they don't, even whatever reason that they're using them, and you said that will be abused, And you said you either extend it to yourselves as well or expunge it. And we did expunge it. So I've just given you 3 examples of matters that came out of public interest in the last finance bill, and we actually incorporated them in the report. So stop inciting, can you comment? But anyway, thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, the Vice Chair needs to add something quickly.
Yeah, I think, Chair, he needs to be fair to this committee, because all the public participation that we have done, it has never been in vain. Actually, we have carried some, if not most, of the presentations. Remember, even the outcry about the housing.
There is lunch, but there's lunch after this presentation, because we have not finished the morning session, and after this we have Kenya Association of Manufacturers. So you can be sure it's going to be a long, long afternoon. So we finish with this one, we break for lunch, then we come back with Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Please give us your written submission and take us through your submission. And again, we invited you so that you could listen in to the others. Yeah. Only canvass those that have not been canvassed, or where you have a different opinion. Proceed.
Right. Thank you, Chair, honorable members. My name is Daniel Dirango from Institute of Public Finance. And again, in the interest of time and what the Chair has alluded, we'll keep this very short and just mention some of the issues we think are important for us to mention. Just to set the context, we are aware of the realities that we are in and the need to finance the bottom-up transformation, economic transformation agenda. But equally, we also think it's important to consider some of the realities, like the reducing real household wages, as it was reported in the economic survey, so that the propositions and eventually the act that, the bill that is signed into law doesn't further exacerbate the problems that the households are going through. We more accurately want to mention about our participation in the medium-term revenue strategy and the national tax policy that was supposed to set the stage for a more predictable taxation environment. And in our submission, we've pointed out some of the areas we've argued in the past that they make the taxation more unpredictable, and it affects households' consumption and also investment patterns. And I would like that some of those considerations are considered in the finance bill. So I'll invite my colleagues to just quickly go through some of those clauses for the ones that have been mentioned. Unless we have divergent view, we won't bother repeating, unless it's really important for us to repeat that.
Thank you so much. Honorable members, Chair, I would like to make our submissions in the Income Tax Act. To begin with, we start with the definition of royalty under Clause 2 in page 3 of our submission. And while we indeed note that there is the intention of the proposed amendment is to provide clarity on the nature of the amount payable on the acquisition of software for distribution, it contradicts the current decisions by Kenyan courts and also international best practice when we are talking about the distribution of software and the exploitation of the same. We thus recommend that that particular clause on the definition of royalty is amended so as to prevent the payment of taxes by persons who are distributing rather than exploiting that particular copyright. Secondly, we move to Clause 6 on tax on subsistence, traveling, and entertainment or other allowances. This has been previously submitted before this committee, and our proposition is that it is inequitable as it currently exists in the proposal, and therefore we propose a more equitable approach to maintain the same deduction for everyone. And if the government's proposal is to wish to raise the exemption, then it should raise it to an absolute term, as was suggested, of 5,000 shillings. Next to Clause 9, on the most controversial part of this proposal, that is on the motor vehicle tax. We indeed recognize that under the medium-term revenue strategy, there is an endeavor by the government to expand and widen the tax base. But the question we have to ask ourselves is whether that is equitable. To begin with, this motor vehicle tax is placed in a wrong act because the value of motor vehicles cannot be quantified as income as has been provided for in the Income Tax Act, and therefore it will be against the constitutional principles and Article 210(1) that taxation should be placed on well-defined legal framework. Secondly, the tax is payable at the time an insurance cover is issued, which suggests that the tax is meant to be annual, but it is not clear on what will happen on motor vehicle owners who renew their insurance covers more than 1 year. We thus recommend that the proposition gives a definition of what issuance of an insurance means, so that there is a clear definition on when one is required to pay that tax. And then also it is inequitable, as has been earlier submitted, and therefore we recommend that that minimum cap and maximum cap that has been provided for should be scrapped off, and also that the rate should be reduced to 0.5% or 1%. And lastly, we submit that there is no clarity on who has the obligation to conduct the exercise on the valuation of the motor vehicles, and therefore we recommend that this particular proposal be further amended to give guidelines on who has the responsibility to value the motor vehicle. Regarding the VAT Act, we see that the proposal is to reclassify zero-rated supplies to exempt, such as the supply of maize corn flour, cassava flour, wheat, mesclun flour, and other essential food products. As has been submitted before, this is a tax that is going to increase the price of food, which is very, very essential to very many people in Kenya. We thus recommend that these particular goods remain at the zero-rated, they remain at zero-rated. I would like to end my submissions there and welcome my colleague who will continue the submissions on excess duty.
Okay, good afternoon, members. My name is Veronica Ndegwa, and I'll be making the submission on excise duty, and I start on clause 42. As have been argued by IEA, we would recommend the current excise duty rates to be maintained on items like sugar and motorcycles, but still retain the exemption on electric motorcycles to encourage their uptake in that they use clean energy. Then on clause 42, while we may not have a problem on excise duty on betting and gaming, we recommend retaining the excise duty on internet, data, and mobile transfer services at 15% as currently is. Then clause 42, again, we agree that vegetable oil should be excluded from the list of accessible goods, but of course embrace the proposal to have coal under the list of accessible goods. On Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act, we'd like to highlight clause 44 that proposes an increase in the import declaration fee from 2.5% to 3% and argue for it to be retained at the current level. Again, on predictability, this rate had been reviewed downwards last year, and we see a revision to it this year. A second part of it seeks to ring-fence 20% of revenue from IDF for revenue enforcement initiatives. And for the purposes, for us, we interpreted this as an effort to better resource KRA. But instead of ring-fencing IDF fees, we recommend that the budget for KRA to be revised upwards to meet the 2% threshold as set out. Then on the introduction of eco-levy, it's a far-reaching recommendation with a very lengthy list of items, including diapers and smartphones. But there is a Sustainable Waste Management Act of 2022 that requires the Cabinet Secretary to develop regulations on extended producer responsibility in 2020. The Act set out a period of 2 years, so the regulation should be out already. So we feel there's a bit of duplication of the eco-levy and what is set out in the Sustainable Waste Management Act, and we call for harmonization of the two to ensure that there's no duplication. Then on the Tax Procedures Act, that is clause 52 of the Finance Bill, there's a recommendation for the Commissioner General to refrain from assessing or recovering unpaid tax that are deemed extinguished, abandoned, or remitted. Our concern is around abandonment, and we feel that there are too much powers to the CS Treasury and the Commissioner General, so we recommend deleting the clause on abandonment, and especially because the higher income earners are more likely to benefit from such provisions. Then on amendments to the Data Protection Act in clause 63, we recommend deletion of that clause because it defeats the purpose of a Data Protection Act by giving KRA access to personal data. So that is our submission on the finance bill, but our colleague Ruth will conclude.
Chair, honorable members, we don't want to sound threatening, but we'd like to make our submission and call upon our legislators. As Kenyans, as legislators, and as decision makers on behalf of the citizen of Kenya, we submit, Chair, that it is time that we take a pause and reflect to look at the effectiveness of our tax reforms. Chair, year in, year out, we have had new finance legislations. Year in, year out, we have missed our revenue targets for various reasons, not necessarily faulting the finance legislations. Chair, our President has made it clear that as a country we should be targeting revenue at 25% of our GDP. We are not there. We are still steps, much steps behind. We submit that in the spirit and the good context of our two guiding policy documents, the National Tax Policy and the Medium-Term Revenue Strategy, that rightfully highlight the need to undertake research and analysis on the propositions. We submit, Chair, that it is time for these studies to be undertaken, that each of these propositions should be analyzed to understand how much revenue they're able to generate, but also what it means in terms of equity, in terms of effectiveness, in terms of efficiency. And above that, we submit, Chair, that such studies should be made publicly available to inform public discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's our submission. We hope we have not kept you for too long.
Thank you very much, the Institute of Public Finance.
Chair, I think I like what she said as part of the parting shot. I do not know what exactly you do yourselves, but I think I would also put it to you that can you also do a study, for example, last year's finance bill, 2020, no, this year, not again last year, the current one, 2023-2024. And I know your name is Institute of Public Finance. I believe you can also do a study and help us and Kenyans also to tell us that last year this is what we did, like an evaluation of the performance of last year's finance bill. I believe you can also, at your own time and your own whatever, you can also do a study and maybe help Kenyans and also help us to see whether what you are doing is correct or we need to improve.
So thank you, Vice Chair. Again, thank you, Institute of Public Finance, for the balanced submissions cutting across all the proposals on Income Tax Act, Excise Duty Act, Miscellaneous and Fees, and the TPA Act. It's something that we intended to do last year. Unfortunately, time caught up with us because there are so many legislation that were referred to a committee. To have a post-finance act evaluation, like seminar before now we embark on the next finance bill. And I think we'll try our best to make sure that this time around we do it around maybe towards December or January, so that these amendments that we're able to make, we have enough time to assess their impact before now we part on the other one. Because sometimes we share the same views as you on several occasions, because KRA wants to push the target, Treasury is pushing them to push the target. So by the time now the bill is coming to us is an extrapolation of, if you change this percentage here, how much does that change? But as I told you, we've put there a lot of underlying factors that will probably show that if you increase this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to an increase in revenues. And I think that is something that has not been properly researched on by this by KRA and Treasury, and as independent think tanks around the areas of public finance, it would be something very good to do that. And just even to mention, like in this financial year, we actually have allocated National Treasury some money to come up with consumer behavior study around these particular proposals, and you can enrich that further as the private sector if you bring these propositions to us long before we start discussing the proposal and say, we told you so, this is what will happen, this is what will happen, this was the hits, these were the misses, so that we are aligned, all of us, because we want the same thing that you do. We want to be able to finance our budget. We do not want to increase the tax burden to Kenyans unnecessarily. We do not want to increase the cost of living. But on the other hand, I was challenging my colleagues earlier. Our colleagues, the budget committee on the other side, are having a discussion on the budget, and nobody is questioning those numbers. Nobody's saying cut here, cut here, cut here. Everyone is saying we need more allocation for this, we need more allocation to this, without thinking the implication of that, on the revenue side. Now that you're the last one on this session, make your closing remark.
All right. Thank you, Chair. And also the Deputy Chair mentioned a few remarks, and I think this is a challenge to us. We don't have a study yet, but I think we have a hypothesis, and we can tell with the numbers, the current, I think the latest we have is up to April 30th. The collection is up to 1.7 trillion, over a target of 2.5 trillion. If by miracle we are able to do the 200 billion we did in March, which was the highest in April, then perhaps we still not meet the target. But we take the challenge on, and we appreciate your time for giving us the opportunity to speak through our proposal. I think initially this was not as efficient as it has been, and we appreciate that it's improving by day. Because most of the Kenyans that are ostracized out of this process, again, if you represent their voices, they feel more Kenyan and represented. And our hope, as preceded by our colleague earlier, is that whichever proposals that are reasonable here will be considered with the same metrics, and that even as we talk to our colleagues in the budget committee, which we can assure you we are going to do, we'll be able to balance this out. Asante.
Yes, and just for your comfort also, because we want to be an accountable committee, once we do our report, we'll actually write back to you and say, we agreed with you on this, then this, we did not agree with you on this because of this reason, so that you also, to also appreciate the time that you take to make these submissions. And again, we're having a very robust conversation about the revenue side, not on the expenditure side. And you said you're going to have a presentation with the budget committee, but the budget committee is finishing their submissions today. So I doubt it that you will present anything because it's ending today. And so I really hope that we encourage as much robust conversation about our expenditures, where this money is going, as we are on our revenues. Thank you very much. You're welcome to join us for lunch. Thank you, honorable members. Thank you, everyone, for staying strong up to 12 minutes to 3. We have a very long afternoon session. Kenya National Manufacturers is going to be a really long session, so make sure you eat enough to sustain your energy. So we break at, what time do you come back? It's 2:48? We come back at 3:30. So, so 45 minutes break, we come back here at 3:30. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.